So thanks to everyone for joining us today. Before we get into the event, I would like to provide a land acknowledgement. So the Camrose Public Library is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our community. I would also ask that while Sue is speaking, we leave our mics muted until she is finished. If you have any questions during the reading, feel free to type them in the chat or save them for later. And once the reading has concluded, you can unmute your mic and feel free to have a conversation. And so with that, our speaker for this evening is Sue Croll. And Sue Croll is the author of 3 collections of poetry as well as a novel. Her first book, World of Mirth, won the Kalamalka New Writers Competition and was shortlisted for a Gerald Lampert Award for a first book of poetry. Her second, Blood Mother, was shortlisted for Alberta's Stephen G. Stevenson Award and the Canadian Authors Poetry Prize. Her third collection, which she'll be reading from today, is Cold Meadow Stairs. This was shortlisted for a High Plains Book Award. And her novel, Seeing Martin, was recently shortlisted for a Relit Award, which is for books from Canadian independent presses. Sue currently lives in Edmonton, where she teaches English to newcomers at an immigrant serving agency. Today, she's here as part of our dementia series, and we'll read from her novel, Cold Meadow Stairs, which chronicles her experience with her father's dementia diagnosis. Thanks for joining us, Sue, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much. First of all, to the Camrose Public Library for hosting this event on what I think is a pretty important topic. I was scheduled to read last year. I guess Michelle and I were trying to remember, probably in April or May. And of course, all of my readings were canceled. Everything was canceled. So I really appreciate that you've rescheduled the event. Can everyone hear me okay? Are we good? Okay, great. I am going to read from my book of poetry, Cold Meadow Stairs, which was published in 2019 from Turnstone Press in Winnipeg. And yes, as Michelle mentioned, it's a chronicle of my dad's dementia diagnosis, his eventual death, and a substantial mourning period for my family afterwards. And I'm going to begin with a poem about the actual diagnosis of dementia. Before this happens to you or to someone in your family, you have no inkling of it, no understanding at all, and no understanding of how it's actually diagnosed. My dad was having memory issues. And so he was given a test wherein he had to draw a clock face on a piece of paper. And I'll read that now. This poem is called Hands and Face. It is true. I will remember the hands and face, the whole frustrating trickery of the thing. My mother tells how she dogged him to get all numbers limned at their true points. Noon and midnight made for due north, 6 headed south. The clock becoming a demented compass, a supposed proof fumbled for in that doctor's office right before my dad was officially diagnosed. I don't know where his attempted drawings of clocks are today. I don't know how that sudden uncertain face triggered his ragged response. 3 and 9 left off, or the hands wayward and drawn in the blank outside the clock. I don't know why that wrong clock condemned him, tripped him up, making that day the day they told us with all accuracy it was dementia. And I'm talking about dementia, but before this happened to our family, we just thought Alzheimer's was dementia. They were the same thing, which of course they are not. My dad had a form of dementia called Lewy body dementia. He might have also had maybe vascular dementia, but we think the diagnosis was Lewy body dementia. And I'm going to read a poem about that now. Lewy body. Those of you who know what this is may turn away, turn the page and move on. You know everything you ever wanted to know about a dementia that fills the absolute area of all rooms with a Greek chorus of hallucinations, silent but commanding through the very fact of being in every room all the time, watching, taking everything in. Lewy body took from my mother too. Her lunch hour became racing home to check on my dad, now wandering. Dementia took her job. It took her peace. Dementia took my father and moved him to the hospital, and he was made to know everything about waiting for a long-term bed. Lewy body dementia filled his head and took his home, took his chair, his TV, and how he used to care when the Canadians beat whomever it was they beat. Lewy body took his speech, his hands that could no longer get hold of anything. Lewy body dementia took his mind, leaving diabetes, kidney failure, and double lung pneumonia to carve up the rest. Now you truly know everything. My dad did get his placement in long-term care in Canmore, which is near Banff, which is where my parents lived. And I'm going to write about that, going to read about that now in this poem called Present Continuous. Beginning with how to get to the lost beginnings of loss, as lost as his memory of the morning's breakfast, lost as yesterday or the day before that, or the last day the landscape outside his hospital window was in flower, in leaf. The beginnings of his last breath lodged in the room itself, and how many times he asked my mother to take him home, but this is your home now. How many times before pushing her way out of the ward to the lobby, to the parking lot, to her car, to her single woman's apartment to cry out her loss. That was when he had a voice, when he could still make sense, make sentences taking place in the slipping away past tense. In the end, it all became present, the past. Even 20 minutes passed, 20 minutes didn't last. It was today and today and today. And that was a version of hell. We thought all of it was hell and all were lost. Those stumbling souls closing the circular march round and round the restless clock of their days, weeks, months. It was hell, but it held angels in the worst of that present continuous, angels to wake them and walk them, a landscape of angels to spoon up the spilled and the lost. And I think those angels I'm referring to are the healthcare aides and nurses who looked after him with such compassion in the years that he lived in care. So I mentioned Lewy body dementia, and one of the hallmarks of that particular dementia is hallucinations that the person suffers. And also I dedicate this to my sister who often visited my dad and was able to handle and understand his hallucinations and accept them, I think. This is called Undiminished. My sister sits placidly with my father's hallucinations. Their invading presence leaves her without fear, and she allows for their casual indifference clouding my father's distracted vision. His dreams are awake, undiminished in daylight. These hallucinations leave no shadow, and though they are benign and without weight, he is force-marched through their shallows daily. My sister moves aside when my father, with the complete daytime weight of his convictions, claims she is crowding his apparitions, which have become familiars. My sister shifts for those stark figures, their high contrast, black and white look of a jury from 1950s TV, now a familiar ghost presence in his diminished memory. But my sister, completely without fear, her love undiminished, accepts my father's shadows, his apparitions, which dance the weightless air they so persistently fill. I mentioned that my sisters were able to visit my dad. They live in Banff, quite close to Canmore, and I live in Edmonton, which is far away. So I'm the daughter who was away and guiltily away and not able to be there as much as I wanted to. When my dad was going through this, my kids were quite a bit younger, and I just wasn't able to be there as much, so that when I did visit, I had a lot of worry, anxiety, and dread about how my dad would be quite different each time I saw him, in each interval, what would have happened to him. And so I'll read this poem, which is called Dread Memory. Canmore's main street falling into late afternoon shadow, and we'd trawl each store until we had to go, my mother and me. I don't know where my husband or kids are in this dread memory, but she'd take me to see him. My mother would make the turn into the lot, and I'd even dread the finding or not finding of a parking spot. I'd look at the lot, the pavement, the street, the town all around me, and think I'm in the mountains. I'd always think that in Canmore, the bulk of mountains across the skyline, robbing the light. I'd feel so much rock and loose stone and scree everywhere, at the edges of roads, pouring down ridges, even pebbles embedded in the grass beside gas stations, the gray edges, the chips, the dust in the air of this mountain town where my father was living his last days. So it would be the parking lot and the sun shooting out between the clouds, all massing behind the peaks of the Three Sisters. Townspeople in their healthy get-ups with wraparound sunglasses and takeout coffees and designer Gore-Tex. And my dad would, I feared, be a crumple of an old man I was afraid to see. I was afraid of being afraid. It was so stupid to be this embarrassed and self-conscious, stupid to be afraid of old people, demented old people, but I was. Now it was the parking lot, each step to the hospital, and passing the wall-to-ceiling dining room window of long-term care. Was he in there? Was he watching our approach? Would he know me? I couldn't see in. The window was opaque, suddenly suffused with light. The sun finding a break in those hulking mountains, or more likely, I was afraid to look through the glass, afraid to focus on who might be there, afraid to see if he was the same as last time. I was afraid of who he had become or unbecome. I did get in to see my dad, of course. And this particular visit is a visit we took one Thanksgiving, which turned out to be 5 months before his eventual death. This is called Intense Light Blue. How to write my father's intense light blue eyes, I now recognize as nearly blind to the present, arranging itself hard before him, intense light blue. I recognize eyes that stare hard at me. We are off. I've never realized that intense light. Off by ourselves in a hall near an exit. Eyes that look at me from that blue recliner where someone has arranged him. In this dead-end hall, I see intense recognition. This Thanksgiving, he will look at me, look hard. He tries for casual and pulls one leg up to cross. This visit, he will stare at me like he knows me, crosses one leg over the other in his chair, almost casual, yet nearly blind to his living loss. Is it shame he feels when he sees me looking as he tries hard to arrange what is left of his life? Is it sadness for where he lives now? What does he see when he watches me stare? How do I write my father's intense light? This is another piece about his life in the care center, long-term care where he lived. And it's also about the fact of what I was doing. I was writing about my father in this incredibly vulnerable position. And all through the writing, I really questioned, should I be doing this? Do I have any right to do this? So that's part of what's part of the background for this particular poem, which is called Releasing the Ghost. When my father goes, he will release us from the ghost he has become, a mad apparition of loss whose relief is death. He can't talk or feed himself, can't walk unaided, and I must rail against my guilt, my shame in writing, in showing how dementia is devouring him, remaking him into a frail shade, escorted to the John down the hall, a healthcare aide at either elbow. The refrain being how dementia is sucking back the last bones and skin and guts of him, leaving a sad paper shadow, a faulty, flimsy copy to escort us in grief, dovetailing into guilt at how we long for my father's death to relieve us of his pain and the ghost he has become. This next one is for my mother, his main caregiver. This is called Her Last Acts of Love. Now that Lewy body and vascular dementia, now that stone-heavy stiffness has shuddered and stripped him away from himself, now that the bone-like Parkinsonian mask has clamped onto his features, my mother wants everything. She wants to do everything, needs to do everything for him, everything he cannot. She wants to dress and feed him. She wants to bathe him in the white-tiled institutional bathroom. She wants to protect him and do for him and hold the world back from him, the eyes of the world, but also the world itself, suddenly awash in dementia, the bombardment and shame of it, the flash flood of it filling her life, washing out all the roads of it. As I was writing these poems, I realized I was writing about the sick person, I was writing about illness, and I was missing my father. I was not actually writing about my father as he had lived. And so I wrote this poem called Gone. I haven't written my real father, his stories, his jokes, his singing, how he said, singing is breathing. I have not. I haven't written the dad, all those pictures, the dad who ran behind my bicycle, teaching me to ride. Where are his thoughts, the pictures in his head? He ran until he was absent air flown up and away from me, and I left him in my sudden ability to ride that long ago 3-speed. I don't know where my father's thoughts have gone. Where have his dreams gone? Do the demented dream? How do their dreams catch hold? Where do their dreams alight? All his sick years have me in their grip, and I can't get anything better on paper. Not those dreams or lost memories. Where have my father's memories gone? I have written the dementia. I have written the sick, demented father I don't want. Where is my real father? Where has he gone? Did he disperse? Did he disappear into the raw density of air? Did his ragged memories join his stories, his jokes, his singing voice, now silenced? He's all I've got left, this last father, this frail, voiceless father. Where has my real father gone? Which I'm sure is something that many people wonder who are living with this particular disease in their families. In the course of this journey through dementia and my father's increasing illness, like many people who live with a very sick person, you begin to wish that it would end and that the person would die. And it's a horrible thing to admit to. You feel a lot of shame, but it's a real emotion. And so I wrote this poem called Wanting the Call. I want the phone call, annunciation, an end to suffering. I want the call so we can have him as he lives in us, in our memories. I want my father's death completed. It has been coming at us with its claws out. I want this death done, over and done with us. I want bells to release us, complete us with their tolling, with the totality of ending. I want the phone to ring out and free us from being inside the dying with him. I want time to work in reverse and for the sick man to disappear. I want death. I want it done. Of course, be careful what you wish for, because at a certain point, we did receive that phone call telling us that we needed to come and see my dad right away. And this poem is called Drive. I fear death is ahead of us on the highway as we drive south. He has been in bed 6 days and he cannot sit up or get up or speak. He cannot narrate his death for us or give even the smallest direction in the black, closed-off forest of it. I fear death is ahead on the road and someone has to point the way. Only my dad can do it, but he is preoccupied with being prolonged. Now it's one drug reacting to and against another. He has been in bed 6 days. The shadows caught on his pillow are indigo, and the walls a softened off-white with an almost pink cast pointing out what is obvious. This is a trick of the light inside the closed-off camera lens. I know this. And I fear his death is ahead. In places, trees push hard against the highway, forming a protective strobing wall. Ahead of us at the hospital, he will be offered the last foods of his life. We will not understand this when we see it, and we will wish for even the smallest direction through the closed-off preoccupation of his prolonged leave-taking, of his heavy shadowed labor into death. Thin covering of life. We drove and drove to reach my dad, laid out in a blue jerry chair, a cold sheet over a thin hospital gown, his fever never fully lifted. He twitched and sighed and shook the whole time. We drove hard and fast to behold him in that chair, his thin sheet layering the fever. I touched his shoulder and smoothed his hair that smelled of heat and fever. I said what I could not believe were last words, but I knew they were. I knew. He lay in bed the whole time we drove. The thin covering of life had not fully left, but it was lifting. In his last fevered days, it was as if my dad drove and drove himself away. This poem is about my dad's death, called Calculating His Passage. My father is floating on his back on a bed of black water, his last bed. And with each rising breath, he is trying to push out from the dock into deeper, more merciful water nobody can see to the end of. You can see and not see what is waiting in the water, maybe calculating, maybe plotting to snatch him up the second he stops, like a trophy won out over life. There is an island in the middle of the nighttime lake. There is the black water of the lake itself, and he is trying to be everything in this water. He is trying to be of and inside and under. He is trying to move through this water to its conclusion. My father is trying to make the island, make his way there, float there on his back, where you can see and not see death, looking at stars, calculating my father, written on the screen of that same sky, waiting to be snatched up the second he stops. As I move forward in the collection, I have a series of poems, trying to understand his death and what a death from dementia means in terms of his thoughts and his memories. This is called The Worst in the Blank of Death. What is worse in the blank of death? The slap of death? But maybe it's all bad. It is absence, which is bad enough, which is unbearable. But beyond the body alone in its blind drifting from the world, the worst in the blank of death is the slip, the slippery passing of all secrets and dreams. I mean dreams beyond wishes. I mean thoughts, beautiful thoughts, now absent, which is bad enough, which is unbearable. The lost interior monologue, his very intellect and those dreams, nightly dreams now mired in the muddy blank of death, and that brilliant collection of unabridged memories, every single thought that ever ran through the river of his mind, now given over to absence. I grieve those dreams, buried in the storm of his lost mind, and his thoughts, blurred beneath the snow-colored covering, which is the worst, which is the blank of death, a slab, an absence, which is unbearable. And then I come to write a short sequence where I feel visited by his ghost, and in this poem, the ghost comes to me in my sleep. This is called I Should Have Laid a Table. I should have laid a table for him. He has come to me in my sleep, and though I am unprepared, I should have made him welcome. I'm helpless and can't make space for him. I'm asleep, yet there is no rest, no proper resting place. I should have prepared. I should have laid a table, a meal, a way station. There is no place for his ashes. I should have made room. He has come to me in my sleep. His ghost has come. His ashes now scattered among family members, so who can say where he is? I am unprepared and helpless. He enters my sleep, but I can't welcome him wholly and properly. I'm helpless, inhospitable in my dream of my father. I should have made him welcome. I should have laid a table. My dad was a wonderful gardener. He was an arborist for many years. And I often think of him in my garden, which is something I inherited from him, love of gardening. And so there's several poems where there's garden imagery, and the ghost of my father appears in the garden for me. This is called Wishes and Dreams. My dad's picture is nailed to a wooden frame facing my garden. He watches me in my wishes and dreams. The Day of the Dead is coming, and in the past year and 7 months, my dad has appeared as a bittersweet spirit in my dreams. And on the Day of the Dead, I will again stand before the image that has now had a year and 7 months of snow and thaw and rain and sun, and still he watches from his perch. Wishes circle around like a dream moon nailed to the night sky where, like my dormant garden, he waits. Last year, I stood before my dad's picture. My wishes and dreams were nailed to nothing but the constancy of wishes and dreams. And in my perennials again this year, his face will gaze at me from the dead, that still land where he now lives. I just have 2 more poems in this reading. In the very end of the collection, I begin to come to terms a little bit with bereavement, with some solace. And it's after a period of time. This period of time is 6 years. 6 years. He went out of the world into the air, into the past. He has become the places he lived and also the places he didn't. And I can live there for him, with him perched inside my head and lodged inside my heart. The time lapse of his absence has become less cruel, less of a wound, while my steadily diminishing bereavement unlatches its petals to the bright and bracing cold of another year. I'm going to end with a little bit of optimism, a renewal poem, a spring poem called It Is Good to Begin Again. It is good to want the world set in motion again, imagined over again. Good to need a clear sequence of framed recollections to picture his life through the looking glass, making up each single image poem. It is good to assemble poems that are miniature engines, small, smoking, rattling machines built of language, resetting the clock of the world with words. Good that letters revert to pictograms, which are unexploded spring bulbs, mere inches under still frozen ground, waiting for the sun to make the world begin again. Thank you.